Hello everyone, welcome to myself, Max McGillibury from Beanstalk. We've got a fascinating, forward-looking broadcast today with Sachin. Sachin, say hello to everyone.
Hello, pleasure to be here, Max. Thank you.
So we brought Sachin in as one of the leading experts of the digital fresh produce sector. And if I'm sounding slightly hesitant, it's because Sachin, it's such a big area and there's so much happening, and there's so many ways that we can attack this subject. But let's do Sachin, let's do a formal introduction, like we professionals do, like you and I do. So the title today is "How can the fresh produce industry innovate in a digital age?" And we've managed to procure our expert, Dr. Sachin Shende. He's the CEO of 1.5 Technologies. And this is a technology, and he is a technology entrepreneur. A number of you already know this. He grew up on a farm and combines the insights of a rural upbringing with recognized expertise in the development of data analytics and software platforms. He's previously conceptualized and developed software and data engineering platforms, built and scaled teams, raised venture funding, and was involved in commercializing the technology. He holds a Ph.D. in Computational Hydraulics from Loughborough University. And prior to founding an award-winning agtech business in 2002, managed the development of bonds trading and research analytic platforms for Barclays, Global Investors, and BlackRock. His new firm, 1.5 Technologies, focuses on strategic consulting and on providing software solutions to the agri-food industry. How was that for an entree, Sachin? Was that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, I couldn't describe myself in that well. So thanks for that intro.
He's also very tall and very handsome. For those on the podcast, that's what a descriptive view. So this whole area of the fresh produce innovating is fascinating. Do you think that the fresh produce sector as a whole is innovating fast enough in comparison to other sectors? Can I just give you an example? We were talking earlier in our green room about a particular top fruit business in the UK, and they've done so much data analytical analysis of the production of apples. And this business is either third or fourth generation business, and the current owner of it, he went to his father and stated, "Look at what we just found out from this half a hectare plot that we've done data analysis on," and it absolutely blew away the father, because the father had been farming this land for 40, 50 years with the assumption that, I can't remember the nuances, I think it was that water does good for apple crops, but actually the data was showing that it was causing an issue. And it really shook the father to think that for the last 30, 40 years he'd been doing something wrong because he didn't have that information. So Sasha, do you think the fresh produce sector is keeping up, or are we now in this sort of groundswell timing of innovation there's going to be this tsunami of information coming through on a digital perspective? What do you think?
Yeah, you're right. We are in this fast changing dynamic world, Max, and I'm not very sure, if fresh produce industry is kind of changing fast enough, or if the industry is adopting this technology fast enough. I think that's a very relative term. However, the change has started happening. There are a number of different companies who are trying software, hardware technologies, and it's going to take some time to kind of get to a stage where really you can compare innovation and digital transformation happening within fresh produce versus in other industries like manufacturing or financial and so on, because those industries have their own characteristics, own pace. Our industry is slightly different. I think one of the challenges which I see, and we always start with challenges, in this innovation is really some of the characteristics, like you got only one season, right? One harvest a year, and that does create certain complications as compared to how the normal technology companies are evolved and the solutions are built. So I think in terms of the change, it has started happening. As we kind of build data-driven systems, people are going to find more insights through that. They're going to get surprised, by certain results. As one of the examples, just what you presented is certainly the case, and that will happen broadly across all of the areas of the business. It will happen on the agronomy side of it. It will happen on the supply chain side of it. And but I'm confident that that is going to be good for the industry, because it's going to drive the efficiency, improve the margins of the business. But most importantly, I think we as an industry have look forward to the tomorrow. What is that tomorrow supply chain like? It has to be sustainable, it has to be efficient, it has to be flexible. And without that underpinning from the technology, we are not going to get there.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about the margin side. I just wonder whether we've been very critical of the fresh produce sector, whether we've been lagging slightly because of that margin, that lack of margin. The example I always give is, when was it, 10, 15 years ago, there was a trading platform in Europe, and they dug a tunnel through the Alps to lay a high-speed line through so that they could get a third of a second faster update on the trading platforms between the two sites in Northern and Southern Europe, and it cost something ridiculous, $500 million to put this in, just to give them a third of a second advantage on trading platforms. You then come forward 15 years and you look at the fresh produce side, and I just wonder whether there hasn't been the innovation because there hasn't been the money in it in comparison to, say, trading with bonds and futures. Silly example, but it's actually quite a good example. So where do you think the game-changing trends are going to come in now? Is it going to be margin driven? Is it going to be efficiency driven, or is it going to be everything as above? Where do you think the trends are going?
Yeah, so before we go into trends, let's look at the way what are the different types of technology which is coming in the sector, right? Because typically when we use this Agritech word, and people use it in a very broad sense, right? And that encompasses literally from, let's say, genetics, plant breeding, or ag biotechnology in general. So that's one of the big areas. Then second is really, there's a lot of innovation happening in e-marketplaces, e-groceries, the meal kits, the direct to consumer sort of delivery services and all of that. So that's another area where a lot of innovation and a lot of new technologies are coming in. Then we have the farm management, remote sensing, IoT type of category, where a number of different companies are coming into solutions. And then apart from that, there are some midstream technologies on traceability, on logistics, on supply chain management. And then novel foods, if you look at novel farming systems like vertical farming or plant-based protein or cultured meat. I think these are broad areas. Now, although some of them are related to fresh produce in general, and some of them are slightly in the broader agriculture sector. But however, as we know, technology and competition, it can come from anywhere, right? So I think, and from this discussion perspective, we need to look at these different, different technologies which are coming in the sector broadly in the agriculture. Within that, I think the fascinating one really is apart from the marketplaces and the e-groceries. I think that curve has gone forward, and a number of companies have leapfrogged there. Apart from that, I feel like robotics, automation within fresh produce is going to be a very interesting thing to watch for. The reason is multiple fold. One is really as we discussed, the industry operates on a very small margins, right? And that means any technology which saves the cost or cuts the direct operational cost is a big plus for the industry. And with that, I think reducing the wastage is one of the key areas. So let's say you're talking about apple orchard just now. So the harvesting robots can actually pick apples which are just ready to be shipped or ready to be packed, right? And they can have sophisticated computer vision and AI and machine learning on it, which means they can do better job than human beings to identify those apples and harvest only those apples which are absolutely ready to be packed, not to be consumed, but ready to be packed. Now, that is a good example of how you can reduce the harvest losses, and in turn, then that adds to the bottom line. Another example will be robots used for precision spraying. spraying or weed killing.
Yeah.
Now that is one of the areas where a lot of agrochemicals are used, or the tractors or the traditional agriculture machinery has to drive through the orchards to do certain thing, right? Now, what is happening is, I feel like the days of big machines is over right now. It's getting over. We are moving towards like smaller machines, which are fully automated, which are smart, intelligent, and they can go and do specific jobs, at specific times as and when they are, required to do, right? And these will be like, fully automated. So they actually wake up, get out of the farmyard automatically, do the spraying or weeding or whatever, based on what the data is telling them, come back and stop, right? These will be like smaller, battery operated, good for soil. So effectively so it has got like dual benefits. So for the business, they're having direct cost savings there, but at the same time, from the sustainability perspective for planet Earth, it's a lot better as well. So I'm really kind of, broadly fascinated about that trend, which is, on the smaller machines, on embedding the computer vision AI into the machines to do certain jobs better than human beings, and, better than the big machines can do. Yeah. So that's kind of, one area. Second one I'm really fascinated about is, and actually not much has been discussed about, is really the fintech angle within agriculture. There aren't many fintech solutions. I think there are some fintech solutions which are within the crop insurance or agriculture insurance market, and then you can call certain e-marketplaces which are probably handling certain payment technologies and all, can be broadly classed as fintech solutions. But if you look at the trend, that is something which is going to evolve over time, because what is happening in the broader world, in the broader financial sector, lots of other changes are happening as we speak. So I don't know how much you're aware of, but at the moment we are in the centralized finance world, right? So you have banks and the central banks, or the US Fed, and all of the central bodies and organizations are, as they call, like central banks, right? And the governments are there, and they play active role in the monetary policy and pumping the money in the system itself. While that is happening, outside that, the decentralized finance world is sort of evolving around us, right? And this is like, built on blockchain technologies, where no central authority is there. There's no governing organization, right? And so these are like almost like two parallel sectors which are moving forward, right? And there are companies in between which are plumbing the centralized finance and decentralized finance, right? Yeah. And guess what? That's going to have like some long-lasting effects and some multi-generation kind of changes which are happening in that space. And that is going to come to the fresh produce sector in forms of almost like real-time payments. Or removing all of the friction of the currency exchanges and everything within that, because a lot of produce comes from outside the country, right? So you actually doing the cross-border payments and so on, and a lot of these are like smallholder farmers as well. So they would actually benefit from all of this innovation which is happening within the fintech space. The second is like the insurance sector within that. So all of these technologies then enable us to go into the smart contracts. Now, smart contracts are like very, very easy. Like, paradoxically, they are neither contracts and neither smart, right? They're certain, like, they're triggered on certain rule-based things. So let's say, we're talking about weather just now, and, we mentioned that April was probably the coldest in last, 30 years. There are more number of frosty days in April 2021 than any other, years before, 30 years before this. And those are like, 5 times or 6 times more than a normal years, right? So let's take this an example, and this is a really good example. So you can have like a insurance payout triggered on these kind of events. So as soon as the temperature drops below certain degrees, then, a certain payout is triggered, right? Wow. And these are like, embedded smart contracts, and they operate without any human intervention. And I feel like, with the robotics, the mechanization, the fintech solutions, these are going to be game changing, and these will be supported by the existing ecosystem, which is the remote sensing, the IoT, the farm management solutions or agri supply chain management solutions. They're going to be all part of it, and they will be underpinning some of these new things which are coming and sitting on the top of those existing tools. But I think these are the two key areas where I think its innovation is going to happen. And surprisingly, Max, if you look at the investments happening in these two areas, right, it is like much more smaller, right? And that is another indicator of that they're just about to start. That innovation is just about to start.
Yeah, so just two elements. So from myself, I was probably a bit too negative towards the sector at the start of the introduction. But I think there's going to be a lot of, it's the wrong word against actually, but spillage of tech. So there's a lot of tech going into defence, and the tech that's been picked up from there will be transferable over to our sector. So all that innovation can come on over. 2-3 weeks ago, we did a fascinating broadcast with a great guy in South Africa, a lovely chap called Craig McBain, and it's titled up investing in fresh produce on an international basis. And the main points he stated there was that in the last recession, a number of the funds piled into agribusiness because it was seen as a safe haven. On the back of the COVID pandemic, the same thing is happening. And what he is seeing is that these funds are starting to get a bit more educated, that they're not just looking to buy tracts of land all over the world. It's the ecosystem, as he pointed out, that's now going to be plugged into these units, whether it be ag or fresh produce, that will be able to benefit them in the way of blockchain, so much profitability held up within the supply chain. And so there's going to be these businesses that are either existing now or going to be coming in that will need investment, and potentially will be very lucrative the right way. Will be good on a long-term basis to invest in. So yeah, there's a lot of attraction now coming in. But do we have to be a bit of a realist? And I always come back to the same quote about vertical farming. That's in November 2019, Rabobank, a large international bank, stated that 90% of the people involved in vertical farming at that point in time will not be involved in it in 3 years' time because they will have run out of money. So vertical farming, there's a bit of a gold rush. There's a lot of naivety, a lot of people duplicating testing and systems. The margins aren't there. They all think that the retailers are going to be banging on the door, but it's not going to happen. So there's do you think this tech is going to benefit margins, or is it going to be slightly like the Wild West?
Yeah. And the answer to that question really is, I think some of it is yes. I think some of it will directly impact the bottom line in a very positive way. And some of them is just going to be mad rush, gold rush, where people are chasing different technologies for sake of doing it. Or there'll be interesting technologies outside and they'll come looking for the problems to solve in the sector. And I think, to me, like a vertical farming is an interesting case. And, as I understand, it will work for certain crops, and it's not going to work from certain other crops. And of course, the cost benefit is a key thing, because we know that if we have to produce certain crops within that indoor farming, it does cost a lot. And that comment from Rabobank is really interesting. That what would happen after 3 years is it will be good to see, because when they run out of money, what's going to happen to those businesses? I think there are certain technologies which will have an impact and which are necessary for our margins to improve or save the cost. And I think there is there's a case for certain technologies to have. So let's take a step back and see the way the existing procurement happens, right? The way the existing supply chain monitoring happens, and the way the exchange of purchase and sell of fresh produce happens, right? And those are the key areas where I think from my experience, we've been speaking to a number of different enterprises over the last 8 years, and you can see when you speak to them, there's this mishmash of technologies which they're using, right? And they're using of course, pen paper, they're using Excel sheets, they're using a number of different tools. And effectively what is happening is, that data, that information is all over the place at the moment. It's not just in silos, but some of them is outside the digital silos, right? So I think any technology which actually, helps digitize these records, or as I call it, the supply chain book of records, is going to be interesting. And when I say supply chain book of records, it's not just about digitizing them, but then effectively kind of moving a step forward to providing them the insights. Right now, these insights, again, given the characteristic of the industry and the way we operate, we would never expect like someone sitting in front of computer and kind of looking at these insights, right? So let's take a financial industry where, like, I'm a portfolio manager or trader.
Yeah.
Then effectively my job is, sitting in front of computer. I'm looking at Bloomberg, Reuters data feeds. I'm looking at all of the, the market insights, and I'm actually taking decisions based on, what's happening in the market, right? While as the fresh produce industry or agriculture sector is probably not there. The mode of operation is slightly different, right? People spend like minimum amount of time in front of computer. So any company which does that digitization of supply chain book of records, but then sends the insights or the decision points or decision criteria to the actors in the supply chain, will have a positive impact on the margin, because I'm sitting on the tractor, or I'm just driving to meet a farmer or whatever, and before that I get certain insights automatically without me going to the data or me going to the information, right? Now, so that's one area where I think the supply chain monitoring and where the industry is spending a lot of time putting something together and trying to understand what is happening in the supply chain. Probably there is a direct cost saving. The second area is this whole understanding of the supply and demand. Yeah. Now again, it's very different to, let's say, a publication industry or a manufacturing industry where the supply chains are so flexible, so robust. So overnight you can print more books, or you can manufacture certain items. You can ramp up the capacity, right? Yep. Now, if that is the case with our Apple example, or let's say fresh tomatoes, and if there is a sudden spike, in the consumer demand, you can't produce them overnight. There is a certain sort of period which is required to produce them. So understanding of the supply and demand and growing things accordingly is really, really critical. So any company which is going to give insights to these companies and the retailers as like, look, what do you need to do? What does grower need to do? And accordingly, if you can try and have that gap or that delta between supply and demand as minimum as possible, then, effectively that will result in less wastage, because sometimes you produce more than what is needed. And sometimes you produce less, and then that has got, on the pricing impact on pricing. So that is another area where I think, it will not only save the cost, but it'll also make producer groups or aggregators more money in the industry. And this is all about kind of also adding that new value onto what they are selling within the industry. So yes, I mean, there is, at the moment, it feels like there's a mad rush, there's people chasing different technologies, but there are certain use cases in terms of supply chain monitoring, in terms of reducing wastage, where industry has got direct cost savings. And that is going to be a big thing, and then improving the margins of the business.
Well done. And how is the ag tech sector organized? And do you think it needs to reshape to be fit for purpose for the next 5 years? And I suppose if you look at the example of say social media, just as a on a techie perspective. So like everyone else, I have got Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, and there's so many platforms overlapping doing the same things. Do you think that the ag tech side needs to reshape for the next 3, 4, 5 years looking forward?
Yeah, I think it has to be, and it will evolve, because what I feel is like, the Agritech is really in the early stages of the development. Okay. So if you see like, the first generation of the applications, they started coming from 2010 to probably 2016. So that was the first sort of early movers in the sector, and they were trying to do different things on the farm management side, on the IoT, remote sensing, and so on. The drone analytics was another big area where lots of companies came during that time in the sector. So those companies have sort of experimented in different ways, and they had like number of seasons and years behind them, and they are reaching that stage or coming to the maturity as what works and what doesn't work. And there was a second wave which started post 2016, wherein actually we saw real innovation in marketplaces and purchasing of the inputs and providing the digital sort of platforms to do that thing, right? In both the agri input side and on the procurement side as well. So that was kind of second wave. And I guess probably within that were also certain companies who were much more mature on the IoT and remote sensing space. Because effectively they could learn from what happened before 2016 and then kind of come up with like a new hardware software kind of technologies, right? So that's kind of two kind of broad cohorts of the companies which I see, right? Yeah. Now in terms of the structure of the industry itself, what we have is if you look at the supply chain, we have companies operating at the upstream end of the supply chain. So those are more, when I say upstream, those are more on the farming side of it, on-farm technologies, right? And there are companies which are operating more on the downstream side of the supply chain. So this is more on the consumer end of it, right? So the retailers, consumer end of it. And there is something called as midstream, which is kind of in between, which overlap, both, the upstream and downstream side of the supply chain. So that's kind of, the three kind of distinct segments within the agri-tech sector itself. And as I mentioned just a little while ago, on the upstream side, you have companies like the farm management, remote sensing, IoT, agricultural biotechnology, novel farming systems, innovative food companies like the plant-based protein or the lab-based culture meats and so on, right? So that's more on the upstream side. On the downstream side, you have e-commerce, e-grocery, e-marketplaces. And midstream are really the logistics, the supply chain management in between. So that's kind of the broad structure of the agri-tech sector itself. Now, does it kind of fit into what's happening in the supply chain? Yeah, broadly yes. I mean, effectively what they're doing is almost trying to create an equivalent of it in the digital or hardware space, right? So that kind of reflects what's happening within the sector itself. However, I think in terms of the timing perspective, we are still seeing the early stages of this of these companies, and I think my view is the way agri-tech sector is where computing industry was in 1980s. Right?
Well done.
So yeah, exactly. So if you see like in early mid 80s. There were in computing industry especially there were players who were focused on certain things, right? So the industry was more vertically integrated that time. So they were like doing their own memories, our own chips, microprocessors, own hardware, own operating system, and so on. So players were like vertically organized. So they did like literally everything from hardware to memories to operating systems to applications, right? And then slowly, industry realized actually, what Japanese companies are a lot better and efficient in manufacturing memories, so the RAMs, and then Intel thought like our expertise is microprocessors, so we'll just focus on microprocessors. And then then came DOS and Microsoft and said like what, we'll just focus on the operating system. And then IBM focused on servers and so on. So effectively, what happened during that 10 years is really quickly industry reorganized itself from vertically integrated to horizontally aligned, right? So they were like focusing on specific expertise and then adding, and then they worked with each other to provide an end-to-end solution to industry, to enterprises, to the normal consumers like desktop applications and machines and so on, right? Now, agri-tech is in a similar space where at the moment, all of these companies who are coming into the market, they think they are the only solution and they're going to be the winner in the market, right? And this is how you see like, a company which is doing a soil moisture sensor or a company which is doing like satellite image processing. They think they are the only solution in the market, right? However, the reality is they are one of the many data sources which are required to take better decisions in the industry, right? So what will happen is and at the moment these hardware players also supplying some software analytics dashboards and so on, right? And there is nothing wrong with that, and I think they can keep on doing it. But what will happen is the sector has to evolve into that horizontally aligned or horizontally integrated industry where actually the interoperability and exchange of data is much more easier. In fact, it has to be sort of almost seamless without you or me or any industry player noticing about it, right? So it's an example of like let's say if you were to buy a printer today, you could just walk in Currys or Amazon or wherever, go online and then order it, knowing that your Windows or Mac is just is going to pick up the right driver and it's going to print, right? I think similar thing will happen with a satellite data feed or soil moisture sensors or weather stations and so on. And I think we need to kind of we as an industry have to take everyone else on that journey and evolve that horizontally aligned solutions, so that industry in general can benefit from those trends and those changes. At the moment, that is not happening, and that is what is something which is holding back the innovation as well.
And I suppose one of the elements that's going to help that is competition. And I love that example that you give of where we are is like where computing was in the 80s. I have an iPhone. For a number of years, I had a BlackBerry. Whatever happened to BlackBerry? Yeah. So it's so difficult. Where you've got to be careful of is which technology do you adopt? Do you go for the VHS or do you go for the beta videotape example? And then you're either a winner 3-4 years out or you're not. And so just on competition, how do you think these new tech players are going to emerge as competitors to the traditional suppliers? So the likes of Infarm is been very disruptive, is very noisy, but are they going to take over market share from the traditional growers on an open field basis in comparison to what they're doing? Infarm, if you're not aware, they are, help me, Sachin, what are they? They're German-based business, and if you go to likes of M&S in London, you'll see Infarm kiosks, the wrong word, displays where they're growing salads in the display, and you can pick the salad that you want. So do you think the competition for tech is it going to be a healthy thing?
I think it's definitely going to be a healthy thing, because that is going to push the traditional players in the industry to innovate and to do more value addition, to save cost, and bring the produce which is more sustainable and at better price. I won't call cheap, because there is no such thing as cheap food. The price is paid by someone else in the supply chain. So really that is kind of the cheap food is really not there. But it's I think it has to be at a fairly priced price tag for everyone in the supply chain. So I think the question is more about the debate is similar to the organic versus conventional farming system, right? So it's kind of similar. I don't think so. There is one solution which is going to work for everyone, right? I think the kind of technologies in farm or aero farms, or any vertical farm which is bringing the market, there is a place and a time for it, and it works for certain crops. And consumers will have an advantage where they will kind of literally get to eat basil or any other herb which is literally harvested minutes back or 1 hour back from the shop itself, right? Or even better, they can pick and choose their own tray and harvest it and take it home, right? So there is a place for that kind of crops and that kind of produce which is consumed by the consumers. However, they're not going to be the only player. The traditional players have a role to play. They play broader role of supplying right kind of quality, right kind of quantity to the supply chain. However, what that means is actually they have to relook and introspect their own business model and the way they were working, what they're doing, how they're doing certain things, right? And implement and look at the places where actually they can innovate, where they can actually save cost, and where they can actually reduce the timing, balance that supply and demand thing, right? Because if you look at the conversion ratio at the moment on these traditional businesses, I don't know, Max, maybe I'm wrong, but it's at 0.4, 0.5, right? So what it means is, out of 10 items which are grown on the farm, actually what reaches on the shelf is really 4 to 5, right? Yep. And that is massive wastage for everyone, from the sustainability perspective, from the financial perspective, and so on. So once you start optimizing them, I think there is a role to play in the supply chain, both for someone like Infarm, but also on the traditional players. In the same way, this organic versus conventional, is the same debate, and I don't think so. There's one system which will help. What we need to remember is really how are the supply chains going to run in future? Are they sustainable? Are they more efficient? Are they transparent? Are they flexible? And as long as those characteristics are there, I think, or where those characteristics are there, those will be the winner, rather than whether it's open, open field, open farm, or a indoor farm.
And just go back to your example of the where we are with Agtech is where computing was with in the 80s. And it's the same with retail in some respects, that you think of where retail was in the 80s and how sophisticated it is now. And so we within ag can also get to that, can get to that stage. Do you think the digital Agtech sectors has delivered or not delivered at this early stage? And is there a way that it can be accelerated quicker to the benefit of everyone?
Yeah, and this might be a little bit controversial if I say this, but I think broadly the companies which came in the digital agritech space, they really haven't delivered yet, right? And there are number of reasons for that. One of them is really frankly speaking, digital agritech is still at early stage. It is still evolving. We've got to kind of go through another level of maturity cycle, to make these technologies robust, make it work for the industry, right? But if you look at there are other key areas where agritech industry or digital agritech industry or even hardware needs to be aware of is we have these seasonal characteristics. Right now, what that means is you get one opportunity in the season or in a year to prove your technology, right? Whether it's on the cutting the cost or enhancing the yield or whatever, you get one opportunity in a year, right? Now that if you kind of hold on to that thought, and then if you see how the traditional sort of or other technology startups evolve in other sectors, they are on an iterative basis. They're agile. They push out little changes every day or every week, right, for users to test and run, and that's how kind of innovation happens, right? Now that model is slightly in contrast with how the industry operates. Okay, so let's say if I was if I'm working for an autonomous driving company, I could change the code now, right? And once the code is changed, I can deploy it on the car, take it on the test drive, and get the feedback. Okay, that's quite instantaneous. I can do that. If I finish the changes, then I can do that. There's no limitation on me, right? Yep. Now let's say if I was a digital agritech company which has built a solution to assess risk on sclerotinia in oilseed rape, for example, right? Yep. Now that flowering stage comes only once in a year, right? And then you have this sort of very narrow window of 2 weeks, yep, or even less than that, to really kind of deploy the technology before that, get the feedback, then see what works, what doesn't work, but then wait for another year to really kind of get that, right? Now there are ways to kind of get around this. You can simulate, you can run some back tests, you can run certain things on historical data sets and come around that. But really like in order to convince a farmer, and we know how farmers are, right? They need to see in front of their eyes something working, right? So if you have to convince farmer, then you literally have to wait for another year to really reach that stage. So that is one big reason why I think the industry hasn't, agritech, digital agritech solutions haven't delivered, because of that early stage and because of this sort of different life cycle they are on, right? Yeah. So that's one of the main reasons.
Can I give you an extreme example of lack of innovation of growers? And this example comes from the dairy sector. There's a brilliant Dutch company that were one of the first to market with automated milkers. So instead of having to physically milk a cow, the cow would go into a cubicle, would be fed a proportion of food because it had a collar that was registered to its metabolism and its weight. So it got the food, and this machine would automatically milk the cow. So the cows loved it. The cows love it, and they'll be wandering in there 5-6 times a day, get their food and be milked appropriately. What the manufacturers were not considering was that some dairy farmers didn't want to adopt it because they got this comment, well, what will I do? So these people have been milking cows for 24 years, 3 times a day, and they didn't want to lose that milking element, but it was going to make them so much more efficient that they'd meet their wife, they'd be able to say hello to their kids, but they were just so so that's a bit of an extreme example, and slowly that's getting better within the dairy sector. But do you think that's one of the issues is grower engagement? We talked about computers and phones. Those sectors are highly complex. They don't have the issues of growers trying to convince a grower, and as you say, of just a yearly life cycle, whether it be oilseed rape or whether it be avocados, or whether it be citrus or grapes. Do you think this is going to be one of the barriers, is grower engagement within the fresh produce sector?
Yeah, certainly. I think this comes pretty much in every conversation as what that grower engagement is, what it should look like. And really, do they need to be engaged with technology, right? I mean, we've gone through number of discussions, and I think grower engagement is one of the important things, or probably the most important thing within this rollout of technology. And when I said going to my previous point, the second point is really why is it grower engagement not there yet, right? Yeah. And that's because of that, really the ROI is not very clear to them. That is the kind of first thing. Second is really they can see when they go and buy a tractor, it's kind of very specced out, it's neatly specced out. So you see from the what the power is to tire sizes, and you can literally spec out every single thing before you write the check, right? Within new technologies like digital agritech space, they don't have that kind of well specced out product in front of them. Right. Yeah. And that is not there because, I think, industry is still in the early stage and it's evolving and it's still getting that ROI. It's really kind of, getting deep into the industry and really finding out where exactly, what those specs are and how to even do that. Right. So that's second reason where farmers think, farmers are very hardware oriented. Yeah. They are, they won't mind, and we all know how much does a combined harvester cost, max, right? So they won't mind, writing that big check for combined harvester, but they'd almost hesitate to give a £5 subscription for a month for a software usage, right? It's just a mentality thing, right? And it's not. I'm not criticizing farmers here. I think it's an industry's job, agritech industry's job, to convince them, show them that ROI, and show them that really look, this is kind of this is not going to this is going to save your cost, this is going to enhance your yield, and number of ROIs it would have. And one of the ROIs would be look, if you have that technology, you can actually enjoy a game of rugby in the evening or afternoon, which you never used to do before, right? Yeah. And there is definitely an ROI on that, right? And I think people have to just see it look, if I can spend time with my family, or if I can spend some time on things which I like, rather than milking the cows or driving the tractor at that time, that got to be there got to be some value attached to it, right? Yeah. So I think those are the broad areas. But also one of the things which industry didn't do very well before was they're trying to sell these solutions. There are lots of solutions which went to growers industry, said, oh, actually your yields will be enhanced by X percentage or Y percentage, right? And I think there wasn't that X and Y, they were not substantially different numbers than what they were getting now, right? And that meant actually look, if I spend that much money on the technology, I get this 1% or 2% increase, but then you're still in you are still adding a new cost to my business. So net cost is still going up than going down for me as a business. And I think that's where the crux is. If you can show that, look, by buying this new piece of hardware or software or whatever that is, your net cost is going down. Yep. Then yes, that it makes sense, and it has to be substantially down than where it is, factoring every different type of ROI. So I think as and when that happens, probably grower engagement will go up, and I think we'll see broader adoption for these technologies.
Sachin, I just remembered that the Farmers Weekly. So all those listening in on an international basis, that's our main agricultural publication in the UK at the end of the 21st century. So the year 2000, they did a survey as to the most advancement in farming on the farm, and it surprised everyone. But they didn't vote for the combine or the automatic tractor. The most advanced piece of technology that arrived on the farm in the 21st century was the mobile phone. But then it comes back to what you said, that this is hardware that the farmer can actually see what it does, and they can talk to people, whilst buying a piece of software, let's give it a dirty word, and being promised that there's going to be an ROI a year, 2-3 years. There's a leap of faith there. And it may be that farmers and growers aren't prepared to do that. But then again, there's so many. You look at the universities in the UK alone, that have got so many intelligent younger individuals coming through, and they're just on an osmosis basis, just picking up all of this new tech, and the specific degrees now on agtech, engineering, and marketing, and on an agronomy basis. So you can. Hopefully it won't take a generational shift, but you can see that the younger individuals coming through will be able to advise, whether they be family members or farms, estates, fresh produce companies that they join. Why don't you try this? Why don't we get this university in to pilot that? Why don't you have a word with Sachin on a consultancy basis to help? So there's definitely going to come. It's just an odd sector in that respect, isn't it? If it was any other. It's slightly protected, especially in the UK with previous subsidy schemes. But things are changing, and things are going to move at a pace. Well, so what about consumers? Because at the end of the day, this is who we're all serving. What role do you think that they've got within agtech?
Well, I think, they will be directly benefited from all of the technologies and innovation which is happening on the upstream side, right? First and foremost, I see traceability and provenance and full visibility in the supply chain. It's really important thing, and a lot of people say so what? And I think people were thinking so what if I know my carrots have come from East Anglia and it was grown by Farmer John. I think there's probably broader story to that to tell. And I think consumers are increasingly being aware and demanding that full transparency, visibility. They're not only asking where does the produce come from, but what was done to it, right? How much water was consumed, or what how the amount of chemicals sprayed on it and or utilized on the farm, and so on. So I think through these technologies, consumers will get direct insight and visibility into where it has come from, and what was done to it. But there's also this second thing, which is the fairness in the system. And as I say, our definition, I completely believe that sustainability is about efficient use of natural resources, but also about the financial viability and the fairness of the system, right? And I think we spoke a little bit on that, decentralized finance and blockchain, all of that. Through that, actually, they can get to see the complete path of the produce, but then also how that kind of whether the system was fair or not, right? At the moment, there's a fair trade and all of the certifications, but really, as a consumer, you're putting faith in the organization, but you really don't get that visibility. But through these technologies, I think they'll get the visibility in that. So that's kind of one big area. Second is as I said, while this is happening, it's beneficial both to the farmers and the consumers, because you're reducing the wastage in the ecosystem, right? So you're growing exactly what consumer want at the time they want. And at the quality parameters which they are looking for, right? So that means that wastage is reduced, and that means consumers are paying right price for that. They're not paying more, they're not paying less, so they're just paying what the right price is. So that way, consumers get the benefit, and most importantly, healthy food, healthy nutritious food, because if they know that there were less chemicals used or less water used. Then that got to be good for my health. So that's sort of that's where I see direct benefits for the consumers from the innovation and technology which is happening at the upstream side of it.
And so there's a standard stat I always come out with, that 6 out of 10 kids don't know where fresh produce comes from. But there is definitely an upsurge on the sustainability message, and also the uptake of fresh produce. In the UK alone, we've seen a 30% rise of fresh produce sales in the retail. Yes, that might be because it's slightly skewed because we've been through various lockdowns and we haven't been able to go out. But the hope is that there will be more uptake because of scratch cooking and people enjoying fresh produce more. But then the actual tech, I get a bit confused that I thought there was a great idea about having QR codes on, say, your bag of carrots or your punnet of raspberries, and you would zap the QR code, and then that would give you this great story. But I'm slightly conflicted because some of the research has shown that people will look at it, the consumer will look at it once, and then ongoing, the only people that will then look at it are your competitors to see what machinery you've got, what practices that you're doing. So I don't know which way is the best. But yeah, just to try to educate the consumer on the sustainability message, and there's this whole thing about packaging. We're doing a joint broadcast with the United Fresh in the States shortly, because they're worried about the packaging element, because in the States it looks likely that every piece of loose fruit is going to have to be wrapped in plastic because of worries about COVID. And just think of it's like the PPE nightmare that's on an environmental basis. But there's a technology coming along where the plastic's going to be biodegradable in a very short period of time. So trying to educate the consumer as to what's coming along. But then again, it's just, Sachin, I don't have the answer. Tell me if you have. It's just how we can educate the consumer using ag tech as to why the fresh produce that they're buying is going to be beneficial to them, and that it's been grown in a sustainable manner. But again, it's a great conversation to have. And the other bit I've picked up, being a marketeer, having done 80 odd broadcasts over the last year, I'm all for fresh produce companies having a brand, but I've been rapidly educated that actually a brand's not that important. It's the taste, that if the consumer can enjoy the citrus from South Africa, or an avocado from Peru, or a carrot from the fens, they're just going to go back to it because they've got that bug. They want to consume more of it. But again, it's just how can we get them excited to go into supermarket or a store to buy fresh produce in the first place. And Sachin, I'm not asking you what's the answer? how can agtech force more food into our kids? But there's definitely a role there for it. So on that side, but let's put you in a corner. What do you think tomorrow's supply chain will look like with the benefits of all this agtech that's coming online?
No, you're really testing me, Max. I think, sorry, I just want to have like one comment on the previous point, on the QR code and that visibility.
Thank you.
So I agree that, the industry has to do more education and more awareness. But let's say, 10 years back, I used to walk in the superstore and pick pack of carrots, right? Or pack of potatoes. And really without kind of looking at that in a way I do it now. Right, my perspective I change. When I pick up like pack of potatoes, I see the way the planting has happened or way the harvesting happened. What happens between those stages after harvesting till it arrives. Right, I see the cold storages. Every single bit in between. Right, now I think I've been incredibly lucky to kind of go and get to see that and work with some of these fascinating people and companies within the supply chain. Right, now not everyone has that opportunity. Putting that QR code in place really kind of, gives that visibility. It creates the, more respect for the people who are working in the industry, and really like how hard people are working to put food on the table, right? And if you see like last year, while, bulk of the population was working from home, there's like, fresh produce industry was actually on the farms, in the pack houses, and really making sure that there is enough fresh produce on the supermarket shelf or, when it's delivered to your homes, right? And these kind of stories are, I think, incredibly important for us as an industry to tell to people, to normal consumers. And, that certainly takes away that notion of cheap food. Like, when I see like, a pack of carrot for 1p or 2p on the supermarket shelf, I just don't understand, how is that possible? How come, we can't be doing that. Or, similar like, bananas coming from Costa Rica or wherever, like that cheap. So I feel like, from the consumer's perspective, at the moment, they do not see the supply chain behind the scenes. They do not see what happens, until that, the pack of potatoes or bananas or carrots are on the supermarket shelf. And I think when we start doing this QR code thing, it's not just education, it's the full visibility, and it actually, it will create more respect for what happens in this industry, but also this notion of what price then should I pay for this produce, right? And I think that debate
Well
just
done.
literally will change that day. So I think there is work to be done there. Now, what does tomorrow's supply chain look like? I think I gave this idea about printing books, and overnight you can print more books to kind of if there was a demand for, let's say, Harry Potter Philosopher's Stone on a particular day, right? You can print overnight and ship it next day. That cannot be done with the fresh produce. However, as a consumers, we are now grown to see that, like, look, I need like produce every single week, every single day on the supermarket shelf, in spite of that produce is only seasonal, right? So like, take example of grapes or strawberries or whatever, right? These are seasonal crops and not many consumers know it. So I think I would like to see, like, that flexibility in the supply chains, where actually you can reduce this gap in the supply and demand, and also we can produce something very quickly in order to deliver it to the consumers at that quality and that quantity, right? Second is really sustainability. Again, efficient use of natural resources and fairness in the financial systems, right? So that goes together. So supply chains have to be sustainable, and then they have to be fully transparent. When you kind of buy a certain thing, you have to see, look, this was grown by a farmer X in East Anglia, or some plantation somewhere in Costa Rica, or or some farmer in Egypt, or wherever that person is, right? And that transparency will certainly change the way we look at things, the way we look at the produce, way we cook it, way we consume it. So flexibility, transparency, and sustainability, those are the three things which are, I think, which will be the key characteristics of the tomorrow supply chain.
Fantastic. Sachin, I think that's been an absolute masterclass. I've really enjoyed that on this topic of how can the fresh produce industry innovate in a digital age. I don't think we've come up with the answers, because we don't know the answers. But I love your comparison about that we are where the computer sector was in the 80s. Sachin, before we wrap up, can you just tell us a little bit about I.5 technologies and how companies can adopt you, can deploy you, please?
Yeah. So 1.5 technology is really about strategic consulting and software development for the fresh produce industry and agri-food supply chain industry in general. So as we kind of discussed, there are like number of things where people are still struggling in terms of, like, what should my digital strategy be? Should I be in the cloud? Should I not be in the cloud? What should my architecture look like? How should I engage with growers? How should I, engage with other supply chain players? What tools my staff should use, right? And that's not like writing notes on the windscreen, by the way, which many people do still. So I think 1.5 technology is really kind of here to help agri-food industry, fresh produce industry on the strategic side of the technology, the return on investment, the cost, the cost control of that, and how do you kind of really put architecture in place which is fit for tomorrow's needs, where we can actually integrate different applications, different software systems, and create like end-to-end solution which will work for your business. So that's really sort of the key thing. So that's on the consulting side of it, but also we are getting involved in the implementation side of it. So gluing the systems and making sure the data moves across seamlessly. You get the reports, you get the notifications, that kind of work. So actually getting our hands dirty in the implementation side of it, and that means working with the existing solutions which are already in the business, and then kind of fitting them to where they need to be for tomorrow's needs, right? So that's kind of second key area. But really the whole business premise is on that three pillars, right? One is really the sustainability, and we already discussed on that. And second thing is about the digital tools. So we completely and firmly believe that digital tools are going to provide that insights to these businesses from whatever data information they have currently in different silos or outside the silos, right? So that is the second pillar of digital tools. And third pillar is really the business transformation because of these digital tools. And that is more about, how do I improve margins and how do I create more value for my client or my customer or for my other stakeholders, including farmers in the ecosystem, using these digital tools and by transforming that business. So yeah, it's 1.5 technology is really built on that sustainability, digital tools, and the business transformation. Those are the three kind of key things And looking forward to work and continue this work with the industry.
And Sachin, how can people contact you, please?
Yeah, so they can actually go to our website, which is 1.5.co. So that's the website, and there's an online form they can get in touch, or through my LinkedIn, Twitter profile, or emailing me at sachin@1.5.co. So those are the ways they can get in touch with me.
Sachin, thank you. I've learned so much today. That's why I love doing these broadcasts with the individual experts such as yourself, and I hope everyone else on LinkedIn, Facebook, and the podcast picks that up as well. Engage with Sachin. He knows the future. Let's all follow Sachin. Sachin, thank you very much. You look after yourself, and we'll look forward to rolling this out again. Why don't we? That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Thank you very much for having me, Max, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Sachin. Bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.